Welcome to QDL. QDL is your look at who and what is making news in the world of quality. I'm Dirk Ducharme, editor-in-chief of Quality Digest. We talk a lot about automation on this show. Automation has really exploded, I don't know, maybe in the last 10 years, or we hear about it a lot more, mostly because, let's say, Industry 4.0 or Internet of Things, or more recently, AI. And we're not talking about just stuff on the factory floor, robots and robots and cobots, but we also talk even things like warehouse equipment, such as automated guided vehicles, or AGVs, which is what we're going to talk a little bit about today. And whenever we talk about automation, the question always comes up, despite all the hype, what is the state of the art? What is really happening with automation in these various technologies, and what impact does it have on workers? And furthermore, should companies that manufacture these more and more sophisticated equipment consider the social impacts? Do they consider the social impacts? We're here to talk about these issues. With us today is John Hayes, Director of Sales at Balyo. Balyo manufactures a variety of AGVs, including some autonomous guided vehicles. John, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate you having me here today. It's a fantastic topic. Thank you.
I thought you'd appreciate it. AGVs and so forth, I mean, they're nothing new. AGVs have been around for a really long time, but what is now considered state of the art for AGVs?
Yeah, like you said, the technology has advanced since the 50s or 60s, and really state of the art is being pushed by sensor technology. So the ability for vehicles now, not just guidance technology has advanced to a point where we don't need rigid infrastructure to tell the vehicle where it is and to understand how to get from point to point. So that's advanced, and it continues to advance in the world of AGV/AMR. There's a bit of bleed over between the two. AGVs path follow exclusively, meaning if you take it all the way back to the earliest of AGVs, they just follow a line in the floor. The newest version of AGVs don't do that by any stretch of the imagination, but the concept is the same. AMRs, by their nature, path plan, which means that it's a blank sheet of paper. They can go anywhere to get where they need to go. That kind of drives back into your AI question that you mentioned a second ago, but they're not quite there yet. But that's where bleeding edge with respect to technology is. But then past that, the sensor tech is starting to drive us to the point where the vehicles don't necessarily need to be accurate to in the millimeter range. Most AGVs are down to plus or minus 20 millimeters, which is quite good. AMR is usually plus or minus 50. So, that's not great. But the sensor tech is now allowing us to see where we're going, rather than going to an X and Y and a Z in some cases, coordinate scheme to pick a pallet. We can see it and we can drive to it.
I'm kind of wondering because we're going to be talking about this in just a bit, but as the technology has advanced, so, first of all, you have automated guided vehicles, they're out there, and to a certain extent, they're replacing maybe forklift drivers or something like that. As the automation gets smarter, the sensors improve, you talked about AI, does that simply make the AGVs more able to do their job, or does it also expand that maybe they're able to take over other jobs and because we're going to talk about that, take over other jobs that maybe they couldn't in the past, as the technology somehow affected that impact, that aspect?
Both. So, years ago, this stuff was sold primarily, exclusively on ROI, which meant that even though it was pure horizontal transport, pick a pallet, drop a pallet, pick a pallet, drop a pallet, it was sold based on how many people you could displace from your workforce, those forklift drivers that you were referring to.
Yeah, they're expensive.
More
expensive.
They are. But AGVs are not inexpensive. So it was really the purview of Fortune 500, Fortune 100 early on companies, because they had to accept an ROI of 2 to 3 years, right, or more. Now, when you start talking multiple shifts, that's an easy one, but conceptually they were sold on ROI. Now, as things change, as the sensors get updated and the ability for the onboard computers to do certain things, which we couldn't do. 10 years ago, the computer you had will fit in this phone today.
Right.
So we can do all kinds of different applications today. So before it was just replacing for ROI, and now the extension of what we can do is starting to move further away from just simple replacing fork truck drivers into other applications where, you mentioned cobot, and, there are examples now of robots on AGVs picking. So it's starting to expand past that. So there is a little bit of both, and it's accelerating simply due to lack of labor right now. But I must think that at some point, people are going to come back to work.
Well, that's a good question. So, I mean, so I'm hearing kind of two things here. One is obviously as the AGV market grows, the cost is going to come down. Now it's not just Fortune 500 companies, but smaller companies are going to be able to afford AGVs. It's going to make financial sense for them. And it's not just forklift drivers that are being replaced necessarily, but stalkers and pickers as that gets blended into this technology. So as these workers start to come back, if they start to come back, are they going to find their jobs replaced by automation? And if so, is there still a place for them in a warehouse? I mean, my nephew's been a warehouse worker for a long time. So if he comes back to work and finds his job is replaced by something, is there still a spot for him in there? What's happening with those folks?
There is. And there will be for quite some time. I used to work with an incredibly intelligent thought leader, and he was continually asked about AI and the ability to extend what can be done based on AI. And if you'll recall, maybe 2 years ago, it was a very hot topic. What is AI going to just take over the world? And if you do just a little bit of search on Elon Musk and his view on it, it'll scare you to death. Yeah. But I can tell you at this point, and this is my opinion and also the opinion of that gentleman that I'm talking about, we're a long ways away from a computer's ability to think through the challenges that day to day, not forklift operators per se, because in general, forklift operations are point A to point B, pick and drop.
Right.
However, in manufacturing facilities and picking a big one that people continue to look at, but the processing power isn't there yet to look at every potential point that a person can do, or I guess I should say, and the end effector concept of robotics hasn't come to a point where you can pick a bag of dog food and a cell phone. So you're at this point, I think you're fine. I think there's going to come back to plenty of jobs. However, the jobs that will go away will be the low-hanging fruit for automation, and those are point-to-point transport of goods from an end of aisle to the dock door, from the dock door into the truck, back to the dock door, and then back to a position. Now, things are definitely moving past that. We see a lot every day due to, you and I both know the name of the big company. And the concept now of being able to put product into the rack. So extending from end of rack into the rack and then bring it to the floor for picking. And new vehicle types and new guidance types are allowing us to do that. So pickers will be here. They're not going anywhere. We can't figure out a way to make this more financially viable. You still need a person there. at some point, somebody's going to come up with an end effector to be able to pick all kinds of different things, but not today. So he's safe for now, for sure.
Okay.
But we are extending. We're going into the warehouse. We're now going up. We have what's called a reach truck, which operates in a narrow aisle, typically 9/6 or wider, and can reach in, pick a pallet from the top of the rack, drop it to the floor. And that's called replanning. So those pickers don't have to have someone on these other trucks. And frankly, that's a big cost savings for not manufacturers, but for warehousing and distribution. So
Yeah.
it's extending. It is.
So as that happens and you're talking to your clients, the people who buy your equipment, do you ever get into any discussions with them about what they're hearing from unions? And the reason I mention this is last year I was getting, probably once a month, I was getting press releases from the United Food and Commercial Workers Union regarding replacing checkers with self-checkout, right? And they weren't overly pleased with this, right? And so they were pushing back, and I actually got some other emails from the other types of automation that are showing up in retail, and of course the union's concerned because that's replacing their workers and stuff. So are you hearing things like that from the manufacturing side?
Two stories. Answer is yes. Two stories. Years ago, at a former company, we put a system in at a beer brewery, and right across the street from the brewery was the union hall. And on the sign, there was, that they put in block letters on the sign: "People drink beer, robots don't." And it was contentious, very contentious. And the funny part of the story is that brewery didn't displace any hourly workers or union workers. They were displacing temporary employees. However, it definitely is, it can be seen as black magic, and it can be seen as you taking someone's job. Earlier in my career, we did a project at a newspaper plant, and that union was especially upset, and in some ways vicious. We would get calls weeks after we had left that, things were broken off of vehicles, and they were really upset by it. Now, let's fast forward to some of the stories that I'm hearing today. Generally, what I hear when we're dealing with unions, and we do on a regular basis, is when we're talking about material handlers, I think in most cases, the union recognizes that it's a technology that's coming. So they're not quite so militant with respect to fighting it. However, what you do see is, especially in applications where someone on the line that has to do something like go out and grab a pallet or unload a tugger vehicle or something, and it's outside of that union. So, most like automotive, for instance, will have a material handler union, and they might have a manufacturer, a different type of union. When it starts to bleed over, then you absolutely see pushback. And I think that the tide is turning. The unions also see that this is akin to a conveyor, if you will. Years ago, people used to move pallets around with rope.
Yeah, right.
And the paradigm is shifting, but so slowly. Just an example, there are probably the market for forklifts is probably billions of dollars, right? And that's every year. There's a huge number of forklifts that are sold. That number is less than 1% of what AGVs are sold. So, or AGVs are less than 1% of that.
Less than 1% of that. Yeah, right.
So it's still a very slow process, but it's coming. And I think unions are starting to warm to it a little bit because I think they see it. And frankly, right now, with the way that labor is, I think that they have no choice. They're either working their people to death, or they're accepting the fact that they can move them into another position or an allied position and kind of work through it.
So I'm gonna take this from the opposite direction then, and we'll end on this because I'm curious about this. So, do you think there is a responsibility for companies that produce automation, companies like Balyo or others. There's automations also, robots, cobots, so forth. Is there a responsibility for those companies to think about their impact, or is it just, look, we create a tool, you can use the tool good, you can use the tool for bad, it's not our responsibility? What do you think about that?
So the answer that I'm about to give you is going to be mine and mine alone. It doesn't represent Balyo, I'm sure.
Okay.
But in my opinion, things are changing very, very slowly, which means that in some ways you have to look at it like a tool. However, there are notable cases of lights out facilities. They're coming. It's just a matter of time. People ask me in interviews all the time. I think it's probably 5 or 10 years away.
Okay.
Just because it has to be greenfield, it has to be built from the ground up. But there will be a time when manufacturing, distribution will be a lights out operation. And you have to think to yourself, and it's not just AGVs or AMRs, it's automation in general. And I think this is the Andrew Yang thing. If you go back to the presidential debates, there has to be a time where everybody starts to take stock of what do people do to make a living? Because it's a snowball downhill, right? If you replace people, then corporations theoretically make more money, and not just corporation, businesses in general. But what do people do to support themselves, to make a living? So I think that there does have to be some social responsibility here, but I don't know how or where. So there was some talk of, I think, Bill Gates and a robot tax. Okay,
right, exactly.
And that seems reasonable at some point. How you do it or how you roll it out, I don't know, because it's hard to be equitable about those things. But I think for sure, if you're going to do the thought exercise, it's very easy to go from what we think might be utopia to a train speeding quickly off the tracks with respect to, people making a living and supporting their families.
Right. And I think it's safe to say that we've been facing this very same question from, the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, right? I mean, technology marches on, and anytime there's technology, somebody is impacted in some way, in terms of job loss and so forth. And it's society shifts and tries to, how do we compensate for these people? How do we, train them up or move them into other positions? And I think it's a question that's gonna keep on. It's going to be there forever, I think.
I think so as well. Early on when we would sell these systems, there would usually be, and we would warn people of this. Warn's not the right word, but just bear with me. The buyers, we would say, there will be someone on your floor that's going to think this is the coolest thing ever. Yeah. And when that person comes to the forefront, you need to foster it. You need to just say, okay, stop doing your job and start working with these AGV guys. And that one guy has written his check for pretty much the rest of his life. And what I mean by this was black magic. I started in this in 1993, and it was total black magic then, and it still is. It's now just moving into a point where we're being talked about a lot again, but it's still, in most people's eyes, black magic. But that one guy that goes, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. He goes from a worker that might have been turning screws or moving a pallet into an AGV maintenance person making probably twice what he was making. Right. And from there has the ability to go to any number of other companies to do this. Now, with that said, you're taking 10 AGVs. That probably the rule of thumb is it takes about 15 AGVs to replace 10 forklifts. So, it's not one for one, but when you find those people and they really kind of adopt it and come over to the dark side, if you will, they've written themselves a pretty big check and the ability to go just about everywhere. And what I see now are kids coming out of school that don't want to drive forklifts, my friend. They absolutely don't. And the concept of the ability to work behind a computer to write code, to program AGVs, or even the extension where maybe they're sitting in an office driving a forklift, where, there's nobody on them anymore. They're driving a
Right,
fleet
right.
from their office.
Yeah.
Things are definitely changing with respect to how people see what we do. But I do believe there's going to have to be some social contract somewhere on how do we support all these people that, and we're aging out. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
51. At some point, I don't want to drive a forklift anymore. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's going to happen, but I don't know if it happens fast enough. We'll see.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll leave it at that. John Hayes, Director of Sales at Balyo. Thanks for joining us. That was interesting. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
All right. And that is it for today's QDL. If you have a topic or a person you want us to bring on the show, just email us at qdl@qualitydigest.com and we'll do our best. That's it for today. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you at the next one. So long.